This is part one of the lecture videos on chair conformations. In this video, we're going to go through the very basics of what chair conformations are, talk about what equatorial and axial groups are, and then discuss how to draw chairs. All right, so chair conformations are relevant for molecules that contain cyclohexane. And cyclohexane is capable of adopting some pretty unique structures because of the angles that a hexagon has. And so we know that a hexagon by itself, if it were to be flat, would have 120 degrees angles all around. However, we also know that each of these carbons on the ring has two attached hydrogens. And so each of these carbons is actually tetrahedral because it has a total of 4 bonds. And based off our knowledge of molecular geometry, we know that tetrahedral structures prefer to have angles of 109.5. And so because there's a difference between this 109.5 and this 120, instead of being flat, cyclohexane actually prefers to pucker and form a three-dimensional structure that isn't flat. And so those three-dimensional structures are shown to the right over here. And each so these are called chair conformations. And so each of these chair conformations exists in two different states that exist in equilibrium. And then in the upcoming videos, we'll talk about how to convert between the two by undergoing a process called the chair flip. But for now, let's take a closer look at these structures. And so here, the way that we draw these structures is like this, and I'll talk about how to draw those in a quick second. All right, so we have these two different chair conformations. And so I'll point out some features of the chairs first. So first we have parallel lines. And in one of the chairs, those parallel lines are tilted to the right. In the other, they're tilted to the left. And so when drawing out chair structures, the first thing I recommend doing is just drawing out those sets of parallel lines. After that, each chair has two sets of parallel lines that are in the inside of the structure or drawn structure, which are shown here in green. And then we also have these red ones that are also parallel. And so the chairs altogether consist of three separate sets of parallel lines that connect in the middle. And another thing I want to point out, and this is a really common mistake that students make, is that they draw the intersection of the red and green lines somewhere in the middle of the two blue lines. However, one of these lines should be longer. So in that first chair, it's going to be that green one. In that other chair, it's that red one. And so when you're drawing out the structure of a chair, make sure that you draw the appropriate length for those internal parallel lines. All right. So far we've just been talking about that carbon backbone of the two chairs, and we haven't really talked about the hydrogen atoms that are bonded to the cyclohexane. So let's draw those in. And so the way that we're going to draw them in is we're going to have two lines going up from the top of the chair for each for each chair, and then we're going to have two lines going down using those bottom points. And then from here, we're going to take each of the atoms that we already drew in a hydrogen and draw in a hydrogen that's pointed towards the midpoint, or in other words, the equator of the chair. And so we can see that all of those chairs or all those hydrogens that I just drew in are kind of tilted towards that middle portion of the chair. And I'll draw a dashed line to kind of help represent that. So we can see that this hydrogen, this hydrogen, this hydrogen, this hydrogen are all kind of tilted towards that middle center line. We can do the same thing on this chair where we'll take those hydrogens and also tilt them towards that midpoint of the chair. All right, next we have two more carbons that we haven't actually filled in yet. So we can see that these two middle carbons in each of the structures don't yet have any hydrogens attached to them. So for this, we're going to draw a hydrogen pointed down on the top one, and then a hydrogen pointed up on that bottom one. And same thing on the other chair. And so for those middle carbons, the hydrogens that are up and down or vertical face inwards. Then, and this is another really common mistake that I see students make, is the last hydrogens for these two middle carbons. And so they have to have a very specific orientation. Otherwise, you can potentially have it marked wrong on an exam or a quiz or something. And so for this, our hydrogens have to tilt towards the shorter bond in the entire structure. So the shorter bond is the red one in this first structure. And so we're going to tilt that bond towards that red one. And same thing for the other one here. In the second chair, the shorter bond is the green one. So when we draw in that hydrogen, we're going to tilt it towards the green bonds. All right, so far we've drawn in all of the bonds or all of the hydrogens that we have in our structures. And so now what we're going to do is discuss the difference between these hydrogens. And so for this, I'm going to highlight this hydrogens, the ones that are tilted towards that shorter bond, to discuss some of the unique properties for those. So those hydrogens that I highlighted in purple are considered equatorial groups. And so equatorial positions generally contain less strain and are generally considered more stable. And so we'll see why this matters a little bit later when we have different or bigger groups within the structure. I'm also going to highlight here some orange ones. So these are going to be the hydrogens that point up and down. So we can see that all of the lines that these orange hydrogens are attached to are vertical. And so these are called axial positions. And so the way that I remember this is that equatorial, I kind of think of it like similar to an equator. It's in the middle of the structure. They're more side to side, versus the axial positions should always be pointed either up or down. And in general, axial positions are less favored. So in general, structures prefer to have big groups placed into an equatorial position that are going to have less strain. All right, so from here, let's talk about the process of a chair flip. And so we can see that we have these two different structures here. And what a chair flip does is it interconverts between these two states. And so right now we only have hydrogens. And so we're basically just it ends up being the same structure just because we don't have differences in groups. But if we were to label one of our hydrogens, so let's take this left one up here and label it as HA to keep track of where it ends up. After this chair conformation undergoes a chair flip, that hydrogen ends up in this position right here. It ends up one more clockwise over. And what we can also see is that it went from an axial position in that left state to an equatorial state, or the ones highlighted in purple, on the right. All right. Okay, so this is the basics of just being able to draw a chair and being able to fill in the hydrogens in the axial and equatorial positions. I strongly encourage you to practice drawing out the chair conformations first before doing any sorts of practice problems, just because it'll be a lot easier to do those practice problems once you already know how to draw it in the empty chair state and be able to appropriately fill in the axial and equatorial positions. In the next video, we're going to talk about how to convert a cyclohexane that has substituents on it to a chair conformation, and then how to actually go through the process of a chair flip and how to use the differences in chairs to determine which structure is more stable or more representative of the equilibrium state of the molecule.